Great, great. So today, I want to spend some time with you, and I'm going to go. As always, I have more information than the time I have available, so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. But I want to invite you to ask questions or even send me questions via email afterwards if you want to follow that up with what I say today. But this last time we talked about critical steps, which was the first core building block for human and organizational performance. And you'll notice there's a common vernacular associated with this phrase, and typically people call it HOP, H-O-P. Personally, it's my own professional opinion that it's undignified, and HOP just doesn't sound right. And so I emphasize the symbol between the letter H and the letter O, the ampersand, and because it's a team effort between management and frontline workers, the organization, and the work in the workplace, and that ampersand is really the connection between the workplace and the system in which the people do work. And that's what we'll be talking about in part 3, which is systems thinking and systems learning. And another way to think about that ampersand symbol, it explains work as done. It explains work as done. So I always refer to systems thinking as the explanation for work as done. So what we're going to do is we're going to run through a couple of review slides, just to get you back in the frame of mind that we were at the end of our first session. But let's talk about risk. You see these gentlemen sitting on this beam, this I-beam, and this is a fairly iconic photograph of several steel workers during 1932 in the New York City Depression era when they were building the RCA building. Today it's the NBC building. But I want to focus here on risk, and you see the risk. You see it. You see the distance between the beam and the streets below. You know there's a potential for dying from falling off these beams. You feel it. There's a bit of dread there. So what do you do to control that? And that's what this particular topic is all about. ISO, the International Organization for Standards, defines risk as the effect of uncertainty on objectives. All right, and we're going to talk about that. I'm going to unpack that a little bit more here later. So here's the building blocks of what I consider H and OP. This is my approach to managing the human and organizational performance. Last time we talked about control. That was the first core function of H and OP is identifying and managing the critical steps in the workplace. Today, we're going to talk about adapting. All right, managers now need to be thinking about how do we build in adaptive capacity, and what do people do when they encounter uncertainty in the workplace. And in our third session, systems learning, we'll talk about systems thinking and so on. Most of this information comes from my first book, Risk-Based Thinking. And I emphasize the three short statements here. See it, that's the logic. Feel it, that's the emotion associated with risk. And then do something about it, respond, control it. And that's where we're going. Just a review of principles. Again, I'm not going to go into detail here, but Todd Conklin's 5 over there on the right, very popular, very useful. I have no problems with it, but I have talked to Todd on occasion and said there's one thing missing. There's one thing missing from those principles, and it's the idea of risk. Risk is an inherent dynamic property of the way the organization is designed and operates, and that's an important feature of human and organizational performance. It's really the fundamental reason why we're addressing H and OP. And by the way, H and OP to me is not research, it's not science. Just to make sure everybody understands that. It's a practical way of managing. It's a management philosophy, if you want to put it more bluntly. And I like to think of risk-based thinking as a operating philosophy. This is the way we want people to think, and not only frontline workers, but also the supervisors, the line managers, and even the executives who manage and operate the organization. So let's go back down to a workplace, and you see this young woman. She's looking at a control knob there, and she's considering operating that knob in an electrical device there. And if the point I want to make here is, if an operation has the capacity to do work, then it has the capacity to do harm. We talked about this last time. Work is force over a distance. Something changes when we do work. So work is energy directed by human beings in order to create value. That's what we try to do. We try to create value. But given that, work is the use of force under the condition of uncertainty. So this goes back to this idea of uncertainty and the ISO definition. What is the effect of uncertainty on your objectives? So, I always think whenever people do work, there's always risk of doing harm. You can add value or you can extract value. So here's a quiz question from our last session. Is this a critical step? Just think about that. There's the definition. There's our definition of a critical step. And okay, so the answer to this question is yes. This is a critical step for this young lad, and he's inquisitive. He sees this handle sticking out over the counter, and he just wants to explore. And so the action that he's about to perform is pull on that saucepan handle, and presumptively there's some very hot liquid inside the saucepan, and it may spill out, most likely will spill out. There's the word will, over on this child's head, and probably result in possibly third-degree burns, at least the second-degree burns, may even lose his eyesight. So this indeed is a critical step. You know what's the advantage of critical steps? It takes probability out of the discussion. Risk is considered probability times consequence. We don't want people trying to rationalize, is it going to be severe or not? Critical step has already figured that out. We already know that it's going to be an immediate, irreversible, intolerable harm. So we don't have to worry about probabilities or likelihoods. Here we're talking about consequence. And so that's the idea behind critical steps. All right, so just to get us in the frame of mind, I'm going to show you a video that I had made about 5 years ago, and hopefully everyone will be able to hear it and see it.
You don't have to live very long to know that people aren't perfect. To avoid harm, we are constantly adjusting to our environment. We tend to think that safety is the absence of harm. But when nothing bad is happening, how do you really know that you're safe? Human error is a strategic source of uncertainty for high-hazard operations. It cannot be left to chance. The risk must be managed. You can't anticipate every possible harmful scenario, but you can be ready for almost anything. Traditionally, managers have attempted to control human performance by simply telling workers to pay attention and to not make mistakes. This does not work. When you adopt risk-based thinking, you can manage the uncertainty of human error and the risk it poses to what your organization values most, and make you ready to respond to almost anything.
That was a little bit of an advertisement there at the end, referencing my book, Risk-Based Thinking. But again, the issue risk-based thinking is understanding logically and rationally, are we safe given the conditions we're in? It's like knowing how do you create safety when you're in your car driving to work or driving to some destination. What are the things you do that create safety along the way? But workers, you can see this worker operating a manual valve. It looks like it's about a 4 or 5 inch line there, and they create safety on a regular basis despite these kinds of conditions. And these are the conditions that are normally present during any event or incident you typically see these, and oh, these are the causes. Well, they're present during normal, successful operations. So there's other things at work here that that we need to understand. And so fundamentally, workers need to have the ability to adapt, to adjust, to recognize when when uncertainty enters into the operational equation. So just a review of the risk concept. Again, see the risk. See the risk is focused on the logic, local rationality. Feel the risk is associated with the dread associated with the risk. Is it going to be serious if we do lose control? And then finally, control the risk. What do you do when you encounter a high hazard situation? And just to review, an asset is anything of value to the organization, and you want to protect it from injury, loss, or damage. A hazard is a typically built-in source of energy or matter or even information that's used to create value. Notice work, and notice there's a pathway between asset and hazard. This is necessary for work to occur. This is normal every day. And then the operator, the person performing the work with the intent to create value. And there's interaction between the human and the asset and the human and touch point. So this is our risk perspective. This is something that I encountered initially when I got into the consulting business back in 2007. Most managers, line managers, did not know how to think about human performance risk and how to manage it. So that's what motivated me to pursue this. So there's two residual risks. And just as a reminder, residual risk is that risk that continues to exist even after you've put into place the particular controls and barriers and safeguards, and you have to live with it. And so one of those residual risks is human fallibility and error. Human error is a real-time hazard in the workplace. And by the way, most managers, when things go wrong and people make mistakes, they tend to associate error with sin. It was done on purpose, and that's not true. Basically, research says that human beings make 3 to 4 errors per hour, and typical reliability when people walk in the front gate of their operation, their reliability is about 99.9%, and then it goes down from there. So it's not unusual for human reliability to be 90%. That means success 9 times out of 10. I don't know if that's good enough for your operation. I think it's not. In many cases, it's definitely not good enough for a critical step. And the reason it decreases is because the workplace has a number, the context of work has a number of error traps that tend to provoke human error. And I always run into this. A lot of people think, well, we're doing a routine job today, and they think that when they think in their inner heart that routine means no risk, and that's not true. So, there's a potential for harm if people lose control of the built-in hazards, transfers of energy, matter, and information. So the first residual factor is human fallibility. So again, I want to emphasize: see the risk, feel it. Is it serious potential for serious harm, and then control it. And then the second residual risk factor, and I'm not going to unpack this today, but the iconic Jenga tower there on the right is used a lot in H&OP, and it represents complexity, complex adaptive system. Even though right there's no adaptive part of that, it's the human operator who's the adaptive element of a Jenga tower. So we'll talk about that in part 3 when we talk about systems thinking. So today we're really still focused on the first residual risk factor, human fallibility. Now I just finished talking about risk. Now let's talk, and this topic is called risk-based thinking. All right, so let's go back to what do we mean by thinking? Thinking is reason. It's logical, tends to be logical, and it's thoughtful. It's reflection. And so the idea is people are rational when they think. But there's a difference between fast and slow thinking, which was made popular by Daniel Kahneman back in 2011 when he wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow. And you can see the contrast there. And fast thinking really isn't thinking at all. It's just a reaction. It's really based on expert intuition or experience. You recognize situations. It's a recognition, and its primary the primary cue or trigger is feelings, and it's also intuitive. It's based on people's expertise and experience and skill, and so those are important. So we tend to be an automatic when we're doing work, and we don't really think about it. And the WYSIATI, that means what you see is all there is. You don't see anything else. So what you're seeing in front of you, you don't spend the time thinking. You see it right in front of you. If there's a mad dog in front of you, you're focused on that mad dog and nothing else. That's all. So you're going to respond to that mad dog, and so that's the concept there. Now we shift over to the right, slow thinking. And that's what risk-based thinking is. Risk-based thinking is slow thinking. It's deliberate, intentional. It usually takes time. We talked about being rational, logical. It takes effort. It's and in order to be thorough, you have to take the time to think things out, and you have to depend on facts. But the point I want to leave with here, both types of thinking are appropriate. You wouldn't get anything done if everything was slow thinking, and you wouldn't accomplish your schedule. But you have to consider the risk at hand when choosing how to think in certain situations. So we're going to talk about risk-based thinking, and then followed up by chronic unease, which is a feeling. So here's the operating philosophy. It's 4 words, and this is researched by Dr. Eric Hollnagel. He talked about in the early days of resilience engineering. There were several books written on that topic, and the earliest one was in 2006. And he offered these 4 concepts, and he hasn't been able to identify any other thought processes or behaviors associated with risk-based thinking. So these are, this is fairly substantial, and you can hang your clothes on it. So first one is anticipate, know what to expect, monitor. What do you pay attention to when you're doing the work? What do you do to maintain control? What do you do to protect people, product, and property? And then lastly, learning. What has happened in the past? What is happening from a situation awareness? And then what should we change going forward? Now those last 2 bullets under learn are my additions, and Eric Hollnagel talks about operating experience only. So I passed this on to him. He had no problem with it. So we had a couple of emails, and we talked about that. So he has no problem me adding those 2 bullets. All right, so we'll unpack each one of these real quickly so you get a sense of what we mean by each one. So anticipate. And by the way, let me go back. These are what I call habits of thought. All right, these are ways you think. This is the way your operators think, your supervisors think, your managers think. So and this goes back to this concept. We want to have a safety moment at the beginning of a production meeting. All right, I disagree with that, even though I understand the intent of it. But safety ought to be part of the conversation at the exact same time you're talking about production. All right, so this is the way you think as we're talking about production activities. So anticipate, know what to expect. What are you trying to accomplish? What's the value you're trying to add? And that gives you a sense of what the assets are and what the hazards or built-in hazards are in an operation. You also address pathways and touch points. You ask the question, well, what if we do lose control at this critical step? What would we do? If it does indeed happen, what would we do? What are the contingencies if something doesn't go right that we can live with? But what are the stop work criteria? And those are the kind of things you're looking at the future to get a sense. Given the plan, the work plan, or the project plan, this is the way of thinking through thinking through anticipate. And then secondly, monitor. Monitor is knowing what to pay attention to. And the purpose of this is to avoid surprises. All right, avoid surprises. And again, we're talking about what are the critical parameters of the assets doing. You see the gauge on the right there. It's pretty ancient looking system there, but it's pointing to 120 psi. And so I don't know, and it doesn't show any high level or low level criteria. So, hopefully the operators know what's happening. And again, pathways, touch points, pay attention to those. Those is where you're going to actually transfer energy and move matter or transmit information. And managers and supervisors can spend time out monitoring the work, looking at work is done, identifying drift and accumulation as part of what's going on in the workplace. And then respond, know what to do. All right. Again, the purpose here is to avoid harm to assets and avoid failure. And there's two primary options here: positive control, exhibiting positive control of transfers of energy, movements of matter, and so on. And then if you do lose control, how do you fail safely? And then, so, what does it look like? What does conservative decision making look like? What do we mean by contingency stop work criteria? That's where you actually apply those, and having resources and support in standby mode to allow adaptive capacity. So again, managers have to understand that we have to have the ability to adapt, to be flexible, to have the slack built in so that we can respond to situations. And I'm a big proponent, never proceed in the face of uncertainty. If you're uncertain, if there's something not quite right, stop, get the help, get the mind, get the people that have the knowledge and know how to respond to the situation. But don't proceed with an activity if you're not sure what you're doing. You could cause serious harm or even kill somebody. And then finally, know what has happened from the past that we can apply to this situation today. Know what is happening from a present perspective, situation perspective. And I use a soldier on the right as an example. Keep your head on a swivel. I played college football, and that was one of the things. As I was a defensive, I was a linebacker playing football in college, and they always talked about keep your head on the swivel. You never knew when a blocker was coming to blindside you. This was before the safety precautions, that protocols that have been put in place today. And then when the work's over, know what to change. Going forward, what do we need to do to improve reliability, to improve the system, and so on. Now, one thing that it's interesting here, each four of these habits of thought interact with each other. And I'm not going to go into detail here, but just so you understand, if you want to improve how you respond, you're going to have to think about how to improve anticipation and monitoring, learning, and learning influences all the other three. And so there's an interactive perspective associated with the four what Eric Holnagel calls the cornerstones of resilience. So here's a question for you: which of these four is the most important? It's respond. If you don't respond when you need to respond, someone's going to get hurt, something's going to break, you're going to lose something, maybe even lose the company, or lose the fail in accomplishing your mission. So of the four, responding is the most important. So let's shift. We talked about the logical part of risk-based thinking and the rationale of the four habits of thought. Now I want to shift your thinking more to the feeling, the emotional side of risk-based thinking. And I like this quote from Tom Murphy. He was a wildlife photographer, spent a lot of time in Yellowstone National Park. The thing that I really like about traveling or hiking a country where there are grizzly bears is that your hearing improves, your eyesight improves, your sense of smell improves. Bears stink. You're paying attention a lot more. You're a lot more alive if you're paying attention to bears. And if you're not paying attention, you can wind up a lot more dead. And I agree with this quote. I've been on several solo hikes in Montana and Wyoming, and I've had a couple of encounters with bears, but it was because I was alert and I saw them. I saw them at a distance, and I knew what to do to avoid them. So chronic unease. Chronic means ongoing. Unease is not fear per se, but it's I like this quote, deep-rooted respect for the technology's inherent risks. And that's a quote from Dr. James Reason from back in the 1990s. And and this goes back to the idea that fundamentally people doing work in high-tech industrial environments need to understand the technology. They need to have the depth of knowledge and skill to react to situations in the workplace. And and to me, it's better than this idea of questioning attitude. You've heard that phrase, I'm sure. But the idea of mindfulness, being alert for impending transfers of energy or impending movements of gas, liquid, or solids from one place to another place, or the transmission of information like a software update or an email with sensitive information attached to it. Those are the kind of things that you're alert to before you perform that action. And that's what chronic unease, and it's part of this internal risk monitor. It's part of your intuition, if you will, and it's best if it's based on expertise. And I like this quote, and I don't know where it comes from. I got it off the internet, and you take that with a grain of salt. But if you don't have doubts, you haven't been paying attention, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. This fella up here in this snow cornice hasn't been paying attention, and he's not aware of where he is and in the danger he is in. All right, so here's a video that I'd like to show you from Shell Oil Company. It's their video on chronic unease. And LFI, you might see LFI in the title. That means learning from incidents. That's what that means.
If there's one thing we can all agree on, it's that we work in a hazardous industry. Incidents, and sometimes disasters, do happen. We can be very proud of the progress we've made to improve safety within Shell and across the oil and gas industry. We're on a journey towards Goal Zero, but we won't get there if we don't change the way we think. The fact that an incident hasn't happened doesn't mean that it won't. Every incident-free day that passes might increase the chance of one happening. Why? Because we can get complacent. We stop being uneasy. We stop looking for weak danger signals. We stop thinking, what else can we do to ensure safety? We all do it. We all think it won't happen here, now, to me.
Did it stop on me, Jordan?
Yes, that did, Tony.
Yep. Oh, fiddle. Let's start again. Oh. There we go. Sorry about that, folks. My bad.
If there's one thing we can all agree on, it's that we work in a hazardous industry. Incidents, and sometimes disasters, do happen. We can be very proud of the progress we've made to improve safety within Shell and across the oil and gas industry. We're on a journey towards Goal Zero, but we won't get there if we don't change the way we think. The fact that an incident hasn't happened doesn't mean that it won't. Every incident-free day that passes might increase the chance of one happening. Why? Because we can get complacent. We stop being uneasy. We stop looking for weak danger signals. We stop thinking, what else can we do to ensure safety? We all do it. We all think it won't happen here, now, to me. But it can. And that's why it's so important to demonstrate your chronic unease. Sounds nasty, but it's not. It's the way to avoid complacency. Chronic unease means noticing those weak danger signals and responding to them in a much stronger way. It means knowing when to think fast and when to think slow, using our expertise to think quickly in familiar situations, but also be able to stand back and take the time to think things through when we need to. Most of us are good in a crisis, when strong signals tell us something is wrong. Our car starts belching out thick black smoke and shudders to a halt. Time to get it fixed. But what do we do when there's a slight rattle? A noise we haven't heard before? Do we pay a mechanic to tell us it's nothing to worry about? No. Most of us hope the rattle just goes away, which could end up costing us more because we didn't fix the small problem before it became a big one. The smoking car was a strong signal. We had to fix it. But the rattle was a weaker signal, and our lack of unease cost us. The same applies at work. We see corrosion where we didn't expect it, or smell something we don't recognize. We might find a pump vibrating in an unusual way. We see a new colleague looking puzzled over a vital piece of equipment. A meter is giving an unexpected reading. Or our well shut-in drills are taking longer than expected. How do we respond to those signals? They don't necessarily mean something is wrong. Nothing's exploded. But it might. The point is to be uneasy and recognize that they might be important. Acting on weak signals is the sign of a highly reliable safety culture. People who demonstrate chronic unease detect, investigate, report, and fix small problems, even if they end up triggering false alarms. Better a false alarm than a catastrophe.
Sorry about that. I was, Jordan, I was just clicking on chat because I saw there was a questionnaire on chat and it stopped. It stopped the whole thing.
Yes,
So
it does. Zoom does this. It's funny. Yeah.
Anyway, how do adaptive capacity is important to chronic unease, and managers need to think this through. How do they build in adaptive capacity to support this chronic unease for the frontline workers? And that there's design considerations, there's training considerations, resources. You can see the list there. And there's risk-based thinking. And notice the verb there, enable. And I should have emphasized this when I talked about each one of those. But in each case of risk-based thinking, anticipate, monitor, respond, and learn, the key word was know. Know what to expect. Know what to pay attention to. Know how to respond. Know what has happened before, know what's happening now, and so on. And so it's a logic, it's a factual and reason based approach to looking at risk in the workplace. But chronic unease is a mindfulness of dread, a mindfulness of potential harm that could follow a loss of control of energy, matter, or information. And I add that last one, workarounds, because it's so important. And I was an operator. I was an operator in the nuclear submarine service here in the United States, and also at a nuclear power plant. And workarounds distract operators, and they become a burden to an operator if they're having to accommodate weaknesses with procedures or weaknesses with equipment that's wearing out, don't work. And so the idea for managers is to eliminate and minimize those if at all possible. So we could spend a whole day on adaptive capacity and how to build that in, but today I'm just introducing it. So we've talked about risk-based thinking, chronic unease as part of the adaptive feature of human and organizational performance. So what can you do? What can you do tomorrow? So first, it might be worthwhile to discuss with line managers and those on the front line. What do we mean by risk-based thinking? What do we mean by chronic unease? What is conservative decision making? And you might even use a past event, a serious event that everybody remembers and experiences to be the focal point of a conversation around those concepts. Once your management and your executive team understands what we mean by this operating philosophy of risk-based thinking, anticipate, monitor, respond, and learn, maybe it'd be worthwhile to establish a corporate policy on when and how frontline workers can exercise autonomy for the purposes of safety, not for the purposes of production, but for safety only. Do a self-assessment. How well is the organization set up to build in a adaptive capacity into the organization, especially at the front end or the sharp end of your organization. And then build in these 4 habits of thought, this operating philosophy: anticipate, monitor, respond, and learn, into the work execution process, the preparation, execution, and the learning phases of work execution. Again, emphasizing this is a philosophy of doing work. It's actually, you could say it's a philosophy of doing business as well.